This is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell. We are coming on the air right now with breaking news because the U.S. Capitol has been placed on lockdown as angry protesters surround the building. We should note that the House and Senate have halted debate on objections to the Electoral College vote, and they have gone into recess. Senior members, including the Vice President, Mike Pence, have been rushed from the floor, and you're looking at them now. Extraordinary images of tens of thousands of pro-Trump supporters, all encouraged by the president, who said he will not concede, he will not accept defeat, and now his protesters have marched from just outside the White House down Pennsylvania Avenue and have charged. What you're looking at now is the east front of the Capitol. There are reports that there are protesters inside the Capitol building. We have reporters all on Capitol Hill to bring you the very latest information. This is obviously a serious situation and that has now involved a number of authorities, including the U.S. Capitol Police, the D.C. Metro Police. We know that the mayor had asked for the National Guard. I've not yet seen them on Capitol Hill, but they are throughout the city. Ed O'Keefe is here with us. Ed?
Well, so one of the reasons why these precautions are being taken, and this may seem silly to many, but nobody's supposed to be on these stairs in front of the Capitol. They are purposely kept empty because just behind those walls are the chambers for the House and the Senate and the rotunda. So because both chambers were meeting, and with all senior leadership there, police have taken this precaution, at least, to suspend the debate and move the senior leadership into secure positions. I'm told they're probably still in the building, but in more secure locations. And this is just what does not normally happen. And clearly, Capitol Police and Washington Police were not prepared for this kind of a demonstration. It appears to be mostly peaceful from this vantage point, but it is dramatic and it is out of the norm for an area that is quite secure and keeps several different pieces of decorum in place to avoid this kind of a situation.
It is quite clear the authorities did not understand fully the intention of these protesters. Otherwise, they would not have moved the vice president outside the Senate chamber as they did about 2:10 p.m. Eastern time. The Senate Pro Tem, Charles Grassley, the senior-most senator in the body, came rapidly into the chair and then said there will be a recess. The House did the same thing, and just a couple of minutes later, because there is no clear indication just how peaceable this protest will be. Those protesters you see live now on the Capitol steps got there because they breached barriers, and they vastly outnumbered the available Capitol Police. It is quite clear authorities are sending reinforcements to the Capitol to bring this into some form of better order, because intent is not clear. As Ed said, it appears most of these protesters are acting peaceably, but some clearly have so alarmed those who protect the Capitol that they thought they had to take precautions to protect the Vice President of the United States, senators in attendance, and members of the House in attendance.
Yes, and while you're looking at pictures outside the Capitol, there are also images inside Capitol Hill with protesters walking through the United States Statuary Hall, which is just right off the House floor, where we're told that, and we see images as well, that House debate has resumed. But that image you're looking at right now is Statuary Hall, and Ed, describe for everyone.
This is an area that's open to visitors.
Yes.
So any normal day, you can walk through here. The tour guide reminds you that the aesthetics are such that if you stand in one corner, you can hear somebody else whispering in the other. What's different is that during this pandemic era, they've been keeping people out as a precaution. So again, the police were not anticipating this kind of an influx of a crowd, and as you can see here, police officers stepping in perhaps to remind these people to keep moving and make their way out. So this is dramatic. It's not as if we've heard that there are violent altercations happening inside the building. There were some scuffles outside with police officers as people stormed some of the barricades that are there, because remember, on the west front, the part that faces the National Mall, they've been setting up the stage for the inauguration, which will still happen outside, or is still scheduled to occur outside. They jumped those fences and caused some altercations, limited there with the police. So this is, again, Statuary Hall. This is the old House chamber. In the actual House chamber, as you can see there in the split screen, they are conducting the debate as they were supposed to, as they are legally required to by the Constitution today, the 6th of January.
Major Garrett, you have covered Capitol Hill. You covered Trump and talked to many of his closest advisors daily. Did the President of the United States incite all of this?
Unquestionably. There is one reason why this is happening, and if some in America look at this and say, hey, maybe they're going to occupy the Congress and it'll change the trajectory of this. That's not going to happen. It will disrupt and slow things and create an appalling set of imageries, not only for our country, but for the world that looks at our democracy in action. But the president egged this on with tweets for weeks upon weeks, with his speech just moments ago near the ellipse at the White House, saying that this election was stolen and something has to be done, and we're not going to accept it. This protest is living proof that these Trump supporters, so emboldened by the words of the president, will not accept it. And I'm just advised that on Twitter, the president has said that his own vice president lacked the courage to do what was right to protect the country, even though his vice president was following the Constitution and applicable federal law. That's the state of play in America today. A vice president adhering to the Constitution and applicable federal law is essentially regarded as a betrayer by the President of the United States. And this vociferous protest you're seeing here is an embodiment of that reckless and malignant language of the President of the United States. And to Ed's point, yes, it's the people's house. People can come in there, but you've got to go through security. Yeah. This is a security breach. I'm not trying to be an alarmist. I'm not trying to say that this is out of control. It's not out of control, but it is highly unusual. And because the authorities do not understand the intent of these protesters, they have taken extraordinary measures to protect the vice president's safety and the safety of senators who were in the body debating this very question about the Electoral College vote to certify it as we know it's all going to be certified.
Ed has some new reporting, but I just want to touch base quickly with Chris Van Cleve, who was there just outside the Capitol. And Chris, tell us what you're seeing.
Well, Nora, I think there are two experiences going on here. The bulk of the people here are assembled peacefully. They are chanting. But then if you look up here onto the inauguration stage, you can see there's a large number of people. We've watched them climb up the scaffolding to get up there. That is what the Capitol Police and the D.C. Police, who you can see, massive, you can pan over, you can see the sort of neon jackets. Those are the police at the base of the Capitol. Up above them on the riser, those are Trump supporters. They're very large Trump flags. They've been climbing up the scaffolding to get up there. We have seen the smoke from flashbangs. We have seen people coming off of the lawn who have been tear gassed or pepper sprayed. So clearly the police have... There's a man walking by here, Nora, that has a Capitol Police shield in his hands. He is not a police officer, right there. So there clearly have been some run-ins with police here, and clearly some tense moments. For the people that are back where we are across the Capitol lawn, a very peaceful experience. But up there on the Capitol grounds, you can see dozens and dozens of those neon green jackets. Those are all police officers. You can see some smoke there. That is likely something the police have deployed as they are trying to clear people who have taken over the stands that are used to inaugurate the president. That is the security concern that has led to the Capitol being locked down at points, and it's really setting the tone out here. The folks up on that riser will whip the crowd up and get them cheering and chanting. And you can see there now they're deploying tear gas, pepper spray on the demonstrators.
There you have it. This has reached that stage where, in a democracy where protest and the First Amendment is protected.
Absolutely.
And the President of the United States has encouraged his supporters.
In the direction of the police.
Say that again, Chris. I missed you. Say that again.
Nora, it looks like that OC spray, that pepper spray that was used was fired in the direction of the police. Not actually perhaps by one of the protesters. It's an odd situation right now. We just saw moments ago somebody walk by with a Capitol Police shield who wasn't a police officer. Now you see the police moving to a different position. So this is continuing to escalate here outside the Capitol.
Understood. It appears that there is tear gas being used on what are the inaugural steps in the inaugural stage. And as you can see, the supporters mounting a Trump 2020 flag from where Joe Biden will be inaugurated just 2 weeks from now at O'Keefe.
Yeah, that is exactly the spot where he is scheduled to be sworn in. And again, it was barricaded as they were continuing to construct. Look at that. There's somebody firing more propellant of some kind from one balcony down in the direction of other people. Inside the chambers right now, by the way, it looks as if one of our producers there says the House is actually back in recess and members have been told to stay seated. Over in the Senate, where reporters aren't even allowed to have their phones in the chamber, but one of ours does, Capitol Police have told senators to stay away from the doors in the Senate chamber. They are instructed to stay put. Many of them are on their phones down in the well. They escorted out Vice President Pence, who is in the line of succession, who obviously is a more high-profile leader who brings with him much more protection when he comes to the Capitol. Other senators are still in the chamber. In fact, one aide is now just telling me this, guys, over a text, that members are being told to, quote, get under the chairs in the House chamber. This is a aide to a member of Congress who tells me again, members are being told, quote, get under the chairs in the House chamber. You might be wondering, why can't we show you images of that? Because every time the House goes into recess, they turn off the cameras. And so we can't see that.
The situation has reached a dire point where the U.S. Capitol is now in lockdown. Both the House and Senate, which are tasked with, according to U.S. code, to count the electoral votes. That is the final step in the processing of Joe Biden as the next president of the United States. After being incited into violence by the president, the current president, Donald Trump, the supporters have now stormed the United States Capitol. The mayor of the District of Columbia has just issued an extraordinary curfew, 6 p.m. tonight, that will no doubt be enforced has to be enforced by the Guard. The Secretary of the Army has previously signed an order that more than 300 National Guard soldiers would assist the District of Columbia. No word at this point whether that number has been increased or whether there is an ask for additional National Guard soldiers. This is the nightmare scenario. This is the reason that 10 former secretaries of defense who have served both Republican and Democratic presidents unitely under the direction of Dick Cheney, who by many liberals and Democrats is considered a pariah, actually pushed to have them do this, to say the military will not get involved. It should not get involved in our electoral process. But this type of antagonizing event brings real nervousness among all the powers of government because of the concern about what it suggests. This is a democracy. Protest is protected and allowed, but violence is not. And there are concerns among a number of officials about how these images will be used by our foreign adversaries about what's happening. Ed?
I'm being told by a senator over a text message that they are evacuating. That's all I'm being told. Forgive me. There are conflicting reports that senior leadership may have also been evacuated.
Let's bring in our chief congressional correspondent, Nancy Cordes. Nancy, you're on the Hill. Tell us what you're hearing.
Well, Nora, it's at a scene of utter chaos inside the Capitol building. Once these protesters stormed the doors and got actually inside the Capitol itself, reporters and lawmakers alike were barricading themselves in various rooms and offices and hideaways, locking the doors. And we actually saw staffers inside the Senate chamber going like this, basically signaling to the senators who were inside the chamber to get down. So that really corresponds with what Ed has heard from folks over in the House chamber who say that they're being told to get under their chairs. Now, staffers inside the Capitol have just gotten a pretty extraordinary message from U.S. Capitol Police. Let me read to you what they're being told to do right now in the face of this breach. They're being told to move inside your office or the nearest office, take emergency equipment and visitors, close, lock, and stay away from external doors and windows. And if you are in a public space, find a place to hide or seek cover. They're even being told to remain quiet and silence their electronics. So essentially, what staffers here in the U.S. Capitol today, here in the United States of America, are being told to do is to hide, stay silent, and avoid notice from anyone who has stormed the Capitol. We've never seen anything like this, Nora, and it's especially striking because this is a Capitol building that has been devoid of any members of the public for the past 10 months. The only people who have been allowed inside the Capitol building are the lawmakers, a few of their aides, some reporters, and then, various workers who clean the building and the like. Nobody else. And now suddenly we're seeing it being breached by hundreds of people. It is a really shocking sight. And you even saw Chuck Grassley. He is the senior-most Republican in the Senate. Therefore, he is considered the president pro tem. He is in the line of presidential succession. And when the U.S. Capitol was breached, when the protesters got inside, we saw him be rushed out by security because, he's considered, just like the vice president, a very important person who's in the line of succession and needs to be protected.
Nancy Cordes, what is the next scenario to protect the leadership of Congress?
Nora, that's an excellent question because while the U.S. Capitol Police is very experienced, D.C. Police, of course, extremely experienced with big protests, they don't have much experience dealing with something like this, where protesters have really gotten inside a government building and no one really knows what their intentions are now. You know from covering Washington for so long, Nora, that every senator has what's known as a hideaway in the Capitol, a little room where they can do their work when they are in the Capitol rather than back across the street in one of the Capitol office buildings. And so I imagine that many senators have been urged to seek refuge inside those hideaways, and that Senate leaders, who are the only people who actually have proper offices with staff inside the Capitol building itself, have been escorted back to those offices if they can get there safely. Remember, these halls are now filled with protesters, so getting a leader from the Senate, for example, out of the Senate chamber and into their own office could be very challenging. But if they can, they'd probably escort them to their offices and lock the doors.
Yeah, Nancy, stand by. This is such an extraordinary situation to see the beloved United States Capitol, an institution stormed like this, and the deep concern among many about the safety of all of the officials who serve our country patriotically, both Republican, Democrat, even the independents who serve up there. After the president earlier today said he would not concede, and some say incited this very violence along with his son, Donald Trump Jr. The president has just tweeted, "Please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful." The president not mentioning the lawmakers inside, but the Capitol Police and the law enforcement.
A little late, because if you listen to the president in his speech this morning near the ellipse of the White House, with the White House behind him, there was none of that. He did not say go to the Capitol and peacefully protest. He said, you're angry, I'm angry, the election was stolen, and we've got to do everything possible to stop it. And the vice president, if he had courage, would stop it. And he's now at war with his own vice president over the decision of Vice President Mike Pence to follow the Constitution and the law. Just as a matter of procedure, I think it's worth pointing out, and necessary to do so, that the House and the Senate, under the law that governs this process, can go into recess for any number of hours until this calms down, and then reconvene and start the process over. There is nothing about this occupation, this act of insurrection that is going on the steps of the United States Capitol, that will derail this process. It very well and quite clearly has delayed it.
Yeah.
It will not derail it. And what comes with this delay is, I think, for lawmakers, Republican and Democrat, an unanticipated ugliness.
So a few more things about what's going on inside the building. One of our producers, Zach Hudak, passes along a few minutes ago that members of the House, remember we had told you we said that House members were instructed to get under their chairs. They're also apparently have been told to remove the masks that are under their chairs because tear gas had been fired in the building, and so as a precaution just have it available to them. Whereas many of them should be wearing a mask, frankly, anyway because of the pandemic, but the masks under their chairs are designed to be a little more protective given the possibilities. These kinds of scenarios have been gamed out, have been planned for to some extent. Clearly they weren't thought about for today.
From a different anticipated enemy. Let us be clear.
Exactly. From a foreign...
Let us be clear.
Yeah.
This was not anticipated American on American.
Disruptions were anticipated, but
yes, but nothing like this. This game out scenario did not contemplate Americans crashing over barriers, running up the stairs, breaching the Capitol and creating a security environment so threatening that everyone on the line of succession had to be evacuated, which I believe, Ed, correct.
Well, that's where I wanted to go next, to convey more information. The whereabouts of those in the line of succession who were in the building is not entirely clear. They were removed from the chamber. Again, remember, it's the Vice President, it's the Speaker of the House, it's the Senate pro temp, or the most senior member of the majority party, so in this case it would be Chuck Grassley of Iowa. Those are the ones that have been moved out, at least initially, and now they may be trying to move other members as well. We'll see. I remember there was a shooting incident at the Capitol a few years ago. A woman had rammed her car into the White House, then drove all the way to the Capitol. When that happened, officers came out with long guns out of nooks and crannies in the basement of the Capitol I didn't know existed. So undoubtedly they have done that in this instance as well, inside the building, and we're not going to know for a little while exactly what happened.
There's another developing situation right now on Capitol Hill. Let's bring in Chris Van Cleve, who sees smoke there. Chris, describe what you are seeing.
Well, Nora, you know, as you look up towards the Capitol, it's increasingly chaos. A demonstrator released smoke to the to our left there, and then if we pan over to the inauguration stage, you can see it has been flooded by protesters. Between the protesters and the entrance to the Capitol is a line of police officers. But this is clearly continuing to escalate here, where folks, an increasing number of folks, sorry about that, are filling up the inauguration stage. A giant American flag has been stretched across some of it as well. Nora, I should tell you that down here where we're standing, for the most part, this is a peaceful gathering. But as you get closer to the Capitol building, that's where things get more tense.
That's not true. That's not true. This is a peaceful gathering.
So, Nora, where we're standing, as I was saying, this is a peaceful gathering.
I understand, Chris, and you should understand that this is a dangerous situation for
our... back inside to you.
Thank you. Stay safe, Chris. This is a dangerous situation for our reporters that are trying to bring you the images about what are happening to one of the three branches of government, the United States Capitol. That east front of the Capitol actually is just right across from the U.S. Supreme Court as well. This is the effort that was encouraged by the President of the United States, as well as his campaign. A moment that will no doubt be written about in the history books. Not a peaceful transition or leaving of office by President Trump, but in one in which the respect of the voters was instead met with resistance. And those who have chosen this method to voice how they feel about this election. It has been met by Capitol Police, by Metro Police. At this moment, we do not believe there has been any overt violence. Ed O'Keefe.
I hesitate because our producer, Zach Hudak, says that protesters are pushing House chamber doors, and police have guns raised, at least. There are conflicting reports about what else may be going on in and around the House chamber, but there are reports now of perhaps some more difficult altercations inside the building. And we also know from our producer, Grace Seegers, who was in the Senate chamber as well, that the press that was in the Senate gallery with them has also been evacuated with senators to another part of the Capitol complex. Quote, there is a huge security presence. It's really crazy, she says, unquote. This was dictated to one of our colleagues here in the building, as they first evacuated senators and then said others that were in the Senate chamber should go, and they've all been moved to a different location. Again, because just beyond these walls on the outside, on the inside, are the chambers. They are relatively close to the doors. They're designed to be so that members can come and go up and down those stairs to take a vote quickly and go back to their offices or leave for the airport or whatever. So it's a vulnerable location, which is why having this many people swarm the building is obviously quite dangerous.
Right, and as you note, as Zach, our reporter on Capitol Hill, has shown us a picture of what's happening inside the House chamber now, the effect of wanting to storm the House chamber, because the House chamber is where, it's the larger chamber. Right. It's where earlier today that joint session of Congress was being held to count not certify the electoral votes because it is an effort in which the vice president presides over and does not decide.
Right, the states have already certified. Congress counts. That's what happens.
The emergency alerts are now being sent to Washingtonians on our phones. We're getting them. So the mayor calling a 6 p.m. Eastern curfew until Thursday, January 7th at 6 a.m. Essential workers, including healthcare personnel and media, are exempt. But again, that shows you it's across the city now.
So there's two ways to discuss this. One, there are those who have what they believe is a profound grievance against this election. They've come to register their disapproval. And those who are doing so peaceably around the Capitol are not part of what appears to be a distinct but threatening minority who are moving into the Capitol, quite clearly ignoring the suggestions and the orders from Capitol Police and other authorities, breaching barriers, going up steps, crashing through doors, or attempting to do that. That is an act of violence, pure and simple. And it is separate from those who are assembling peaceably to express their displeasure. But it must be noted that this is Americans trying to take control and lay under siege the Capitol of the United States government. And that is a fact. And you cannot separate their motives and their actions from the rhetoric of the president. He can talk about respecting Capitol Police now, but that's not what he was saying this morning, and it's not what he's been saying for weeks.
All right, let's go to Nancy Cordes now as new information. She's our chief congressional correspondent. Nancy.
Nora, we're now hearing from reporters who are locked inside the Senate chamber that the protesters have breached the Senate chamber itself. So they're no longer just inside the U.S. Capitol. They're actually inside the Senate chamber, which, as you recall, went into recess a few minutes ago when all of this started. And according to at least one reporter inside the chamber, a protester has actually climbed up on the dais and is chanting slogans in favor of President Trump. So what we don't know is whether senators and reporters who are inside the chamber right now are being escorted out, being shown someplace else to go to stay safe. I had texted a senator a few minutes ago to ask, where are you? What are you being told to do in order to stay safe? And he responded, I can't tell you anything, because obviously this is such a tense situation that lawmakers are being told not to give any information about where they're being taken and the measures that are being taken to keep them safe. So it's a very fluid situation, and one in which, frankly, a lot of reporters and lawmakers are finding themselves thrown together in the same office spaces and certainly within the same Senate chamber to try to huddle in place together, because there are just only so many places that you can go in the U.S. Capitol and lock the door to keep yourself separated from whoever else is outside.
Our Zach Hudak is inside the Senate chamber. Or
House chamber.
Thank you, the House chamber. Thank you. He's inside the House chamber where protesters have breached the doors there. Where that joint session of Congress was being held earlier. We are trying to get Zach on the phone, but you can imagine that it is a tense situation.
This is video from earlier.
Look at this, look at this. That's how they banged.
Unclear what that sound is, whether it was
whether it's just, yes. One of the questions we have at this hour is, where is the National Guard, which is deployed by governors. It's been deployed in Maryland, for instance, to help with vaccine distribution. It's helped during hurricanes. In this instance, in the District of Columbia, the Secretary of the Army plays the role there. And the question is when the National Guard will be arriving to help with this situation. Ed O'Keefe?
To secure the Capitol and reclaim these buildings so they can exist as they ordinarily do. This is extraordinary. This is completely out of ordinary, and these buildings need to be reoccupied and secured.
Right.
So Congress can conduct the business of the American government.
Right. We can convey again, senators have been evacuated
from the chamber.
From the chamber, and they are being moved to a third location, I'm told, They will be bussed, so it could be that they're removing them off of the Capitol complex.
Yeah, I am texting with a senator now who says they cannot tell us where because of security, but will inform us.
And we can see here, again, this is the west front of the Capitol, faces the National Mall where the inauguration happens. Those guys in yellow up at the top are the ones that are law enforcement beginning to clear what is supposed to be the inaugural stand and try to diffuse the situation and
push
try to
things
restore
down
order.
a little bit
Exactly.
and get a little bit of breathing space for the majestic Capitol building so it can begin the process of reclaiming its own territory, reclaiming its own order of business.
Inside the Capitol, again, in Statuary Hall, we showed you that a little while ago. You saw the people walking through with the statues around it, the old House chamber. There were cameras in there. Remember, we were showing you images. C-SPAN says the Capitol Police has told them to vacate that area, and someone had unplugged their cameras in Statuary Hall. Unclear if that was law enforcement or the protesters, but we know that there is a tense situation inside the Capitol, in the area of the House chamber, and we're working, obviously, to get more information.
Our chief political correspondent, John Dickerson, notes that these protesters are now on the inaugural steps where President Trump 4 years ago gave a speech about American carnage.
And said he would give the government back to the people, that this, as he described it in that inauguration address, this grouping in Washington of Republicans and Democrats and lobbyists who had deprived Americans of their economic wherewithal, that would end. And that was a resonant language for these protesters. But we have gone far beyond rhetoric. We have gone to incitement. We've gone to occupation. We've gone to a place of, I think it's fair to say, astonishment.
Yeah.
These are images we never expected to see in our great country. A cleavage, a ripping apart of the sense of what government is, what it's meant to accomplish, and how it is sanctified in every presidential election. And that's what is now being torn apart before our very eyes, or there is an attempt to tear it apart before our very eyes.
Also notably, up in Wilmington, Delaware, the president-elect, Joe Biden, was scheduled to speak, and he's actually at the location where he is scheduled to speak, but has not yet spoken. As for the vice president-elect, Kamala Harris, transition officials won't comment on her exact location, but the president-elect is safe, one of them tells our Tim Perry, a producer who follows her. She was at the Capitol earlier today for a Senate Intelligence Committee briefing, but was not planning to attend the Electoral College ceremonies that were scheduled to take place.
I want to bring in back Nancy Cordes, who is on Capitol Hill. And Nancy, there are extraordinarily disturbing images of what, after viewing them, I would describe now as a mob fighting with law enforcement right underneath the Capitol Rotunda. What are you seeing and hearing?
Nora, we're getting some really good eyewitness information from our colleague Grace Seegers, who was actually inside the Senate chamber covering the debate when all of this happened. She said that she has been evacuated with the senators from the chamber. She said they're going to another building on foot, and that there's a huge security presence. She says authorities first evacuated the senators and then said that the press could go too, and they took the elevators down from the Senate gallery in order to avoid protesters. One thing you'll know if you've covered the U.S. Capitol for any period of time is that there are a huge number of back hallways and hidden elevators and different ways to get in and out of these buildings. So it appears that that is what U.S. Capitol Police did, escorting senators out of the Senate chamber in order to keep them safe. I have been texting with one of those senators and asked, are you and everyone around you safe and uninjured? And he responded, yes. He said Capitol Police first secured the Senate when the Capitol was breached and then evacuated us elsewhere. He says as far as he knows, everyone around him is safe right now, but he can't tell me where he is now because he's been instructed not to share his location for obvious security reasons.
Nancy, what's happening now at the dais in the House chamber?
Security.
Well, the reporting from our Zach Hudak, who's been in the House chamber, is that lawmakers were told to get under their desks and to look for masks that had been placed there, gas masks, because there was a possibility of tear gas being released. So we're seeing these, these safety precautions that have been put in place that most people never assumed would actually have to be used. They are being used today. And, just to give you a sense, Nora, of the confusion that has reigned here, the House chamber has gone in and out of session multiple times. They've been debating, and then the Capitol was breached, and they went into recess, but then they started up again. But then the protesters got closer to the House chamber, and so they went into recess again. Then they were told to get under their desks. So just by watching these proceedings unfold, you can get a sense of the escalation of tension within the House chamber. And while U.S. Capitol Police are incredibly well trained, there simply aren't enough of them to beat back a crowd that is intent on getting through. I think you showed some video a few minutes ago of what looked like protesters getting inside the building by basically breaking the security glass on a door that was leading into the Capitol Visitor Center. These are heavily, there it is, these are heavily fortified doors. The fact that they were able to break that glass and apparently get in is really astounding. These doors were not built all that long ago.
All right, I want to show you now, this is the east front of the Capitol, which is across from the Supreme Court. On the west front of the Capitol is where the inaugural stage is set 2 weeks from now for the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. This is where you see a number of protesters as well as police there, and what appears to be more of just sort of people milling about and standing about there. What is the deep concern is what's happening inside the United States Capitol right now. It's what we noted on the Senate floor and the House floor, and of course the number of lawmakers and the D.C. Capitol Police who are concerned about their own safety. The President of the United States was tweeting about the courage of the Vice President today. At this hour, we've not heard from the Vice President, who we don't know where he is. At this hour, he is in an undisclosed location. And there are calls even from the president's own former White House communications director, Alyssa Farah, to condemn this violence, saying, "Real Donald Trump, you are the only one they will listen to for our country." Once again, a question about the leadership of this country and
the vacuum that exists at this moment. The vacuum presided by the President of the United States. I've had texts from several Republicans, I imagine perhaps you have as well, Ed, amplifying what Alyssa Farah just said. The President needs to issue a tweet, put a video up very quickly saying, get out of the Capitol, peaceably assemble, and stop this violence. Nothing from the President, nothing except that anodyne reference to let's support our Capitol Police. That's not sufficient. You set this in motion, you must stop it. But the other underlying an alarming reality of that is the idea that the President can directionally influence this small mob that has breached the Capitol. And that underscores something that is alarming about this scenario, that they are so devoted to him that they will do things of this nature, which we should underscore. This kind of action, breaking glass, coming into the Capitol, menacing Capitol Police, is a crime. They have committed crimes, and they should be prosecuted. And once the Capitol is secured, that process will begin. But the President is now being asked by those who served him faithfully to bring this to an end, via Twitter video, something. Fill this vacuum that you have created that has created so much disturbance and unrest in our nation's capital.
And to that concern about a vacuum, a senior aide to the President-elect, Joe Biden, tells me, quote, he's going to speak to the events at the Capitol. I asked when, he said soon. He was already scheduled to speak this afternoon from a theater in downtown Wilmington, Delaware, about 90 minutes from Washington. Now they're changing the plans, and he will speak to what's going on right now at the Capitol. And the other extraordinary thing we have to keep in mind, by law, they're going to have to finish this proceeding of the House and Senate at some point. There is nothing in the law as written A, that outlines this.
No.
But B, that outlines when you can take breaks, for that matter.
You can go into recess,
right?
but
so
you've got to get back on track.
We are literally right now. So much in the last 4 years has been within the confines of the rules and the laws, as much of a pressure point as they've been. This is literally not, because at some point they got to come back and finish this, and they're going to have to do it in some kind of decorous way, or at least, you know, organized way, and it's just incredible to think they might have to come back and do that later tonight with the Capitol under incredible security protection.
Under the law, I'm advised, just by our excellent executive producer, Jay Shaler, they can recess until 10 a.m. tomorrow and reconvene.
Well, they may have to.
And that may be where this heads. However, I can imagine some lawmakers would say, no, we're going to clear this, we're going to get this straightened out, and we're going to go back to work. Because we're not going to withdraw for an entire day and night. I can imagine a very lively conversation going on wherever they're able to have a conversation, however they're able to have it. But some institutional lions in the Senate and lionesses will say in the House, no, we're going to go back to work. We're going to set this right, and we're going to go back to work. I can imagine that debate going on. However it plays out, that they can recess, but I can imagine a very strong impulse within both bodies to get back to work.
Major, you keep anticipating things that are happening. Our Grace Seegers passes along. She's our producer who is in and around where senators are currently being held. She reports we've been told that the Senate, wherever they are right now, and it's just extraordinary to have to say things like this, is doing a roll call. Only one reporter is allowed in the room right now. It is not a representative of the television pool. But again, the Senate is doing at least some kind of a formal attendance taking to see who's there. Remember, they could meet as a body wherever they are.
Yes.
If they have a quorum, which it appears they might.
And in this virtual world influenced so much by pandemic protocols, these things have been learned. And so they may, in a very strange and unexpected way, provide a means by which a quorum can be assembled and they can get back to work.
Yeah, and I'm actually texting with our political correspondent and 60 Minutes correspondent John Dickerson about that very matter, that the senators who have objected and the House members who have objected to what is normally a very quick counting of the electoral votes. In years past, it's been done in 10 or 20 minutes. They could stop their objecting and move this on very quickly, and thus nothing there for anybody to protest. The process is done.
Right. They could also go on Twitter and say, all objections will be withdrawn unless you leave the Capitol. If you occupy the Capitol, we will no longer go forward with this. You cannot negotiate with the Congress by occupying it. You simply cannot. And that is something they could also do. Ted Cruz could do that. Josh Hawley could do that.
Well, and
James Langford could do that.
Hold on, we have Zach Hudak on the phone. Zach, tell us what you're seeing.
I was just in the House chamber where they just evacuated us and took a good ways from it. But on the way out, there were what we believe were protesters who were trying to knock in sort of the center doors in that chamber. Security placed a large cabinet in front of it and were holding it shut. And guns drawn and aimed at the door. And shortly before they took us out, we were able to hear what appeared to be a gunshot or some other kind of loud bang. Members and press were given gas masks because Capitol Police said that tear gas had been used around the Rotunda area of the Capitol.
Hey, Zach, this is Major Garrett. Nora stepped away for just a second, so let me engage you, if I could, for just a moment. What are you doing and seeing as you are right now, and where, if you can, I know that you are under some requirements not to be too specific, but if you can give a general sense of where you are and what's happening immediately around you, do you feel in danger in any sense?
I do not. We're being taken to a safe area and moved very efficiently by the Capitol Police, who were extremely on top of things. The only point at which I think everyone got a little bit nervous was when there was that literal banging, trying to knock in the doors that were being held by the cabinet.
Do you have any? Go ahead, Ed, jump in.
Zach, take us back to what was going on in the House chamber itself. There are conflicting reports about whether guns were drawn and used or whether there were other barricades put in place to keep people out. What can you tell us, having been in the room?
I can tell you that guns were drawn. They were handguns, and there were, I believe, 2 of them from
by whom?
Security or Capitol Police. They were pointed out that door that as I said, protesters trying to knock in. We did hear what appeared to be a gunshot in the distance. It was some kind of loud bang. And there was just kind of general commotion. I think that, like, as soon as that door started getting knocked, everyone, the members and their staff included, were worried and, were trying to get out of there as soon as possible.
And from your vantage point, Zach, in the House chamber, did you see anyone injured or hurt in any way?
No.
Okay.
No.
And there were still members in the chamber when this happened, correct? Members of Congress?
There were. There were, but they were taken out sort of as soon as you started being able to hear noises right outside. And the press was taken out shortly after.
Earlier in the proceedings, was the Speaker of the House still presiding?
She was.
And was she escorted out first?
I believe so, but from where I was sitting in the gallery, I couldn't tell for certain. I believe the first one to be taken out was Representative Hoyer when there was
the majority leader.
House majority leader, sorry.
And Zach, the members who had objected, the some 100 members, they did not want to stay inside the House chamber?
They did not. And in fact, as we went into lockdown, one man who was sitting up on the other side of the gallery looking down pulled off his mask and started yelling to them, tell the president to call this off or something along those lines. He was sort of hushed up pretty quickly, but there was certainly blame put on them, at least from one guy in the room.
Zach, stand by. We have some new reporting right now. We have been told by a senior source that Mayor Bowser has requested an additional 200 National Guard troops, that request is under review by the Pentagon. It has not been denied, but is under review at this hour, as it's clear that the mayor of D.C., who has imposed a 6 p.m. curfew, is requesting additional federal assistance from the National Guard at this point. Normally, a governor would just call in the National Guard, but in the District of Columbia,
correct,
the Secretary of the Army serves as the governor.
So, to our conversation moments ago about what will be the voice of those who are objecting and want to use Congress to superimpose itself on the will of the states as expressed through the Electoral College. One has spoken via Twitter. Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin. I'll read it directly. The Capitol Police have acted with incredible professionalism. I sincerely thank them for their service and condemn all lawless activity.
And Marco Rubio.
That's moving in a direction, slowly. It is moving in a direction.
What direction do you think that it's moving in?
To describe this as what it is, lawless criminal activity by a few to breach the Capitol and attempt to occupy it in order to slow down this process.
Well, Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida, went further in a similar tweet. There is nothing patriotic about what is occurring on Capitol Hill, he tweeted. This is third world style anti-American anarchy. And he's not wrong.
He is correct. And this needs to be said by more, with greater volume and more regularity. This is a moment. This is a bright, shining moment for every Republican, every Democrat, but especially those Republicans who've associated themselves in word and in deed with this effort to challenge the election and challenge the Congress's counting of the electoral votes.
I want to bring in John Dickerson now, who joins us on the phone. And John, for those who say that this moment is unimaginable, that this couldn't happen, does that ring true to you?
Well, there were plenty of people who could imagine it on election night when the president suggested that the election had been stolen. And then day by day by day, we saw the power the president had over his supporters, so powerful it cowed many in his own party, and that there are millions of people who believe this. And so many people see a direct line from the president's remarks immediately after the election to what's happening now. And in the American system, the president is the one who is supposed to cool the passions of the people. That has been completely turned on its head. And just to pick up on Major's point, the stage is set for someone to walk on and behave in the way that's in the best American tradition to cool the passion, to act as the adult in this process. It might be one person, it might be a whole score of people, but that's the next big chapter. And the question is, who walks into that role that is waiting for them?
And to pick up on John's point, could this be anticipated? Well, On CBS this morning, about a month ago, I quoted Winston Churchill, who said the following: "You cannot reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth." Republicans have put their head in the mouth of Donald Trump, the President of the United States, for 6 weeks, hoping that this wouldn't come. But on social media, as recently as 48 hours ago, you could see people saying, "I'm attending this, I'm looking for ways into the Capitol, I've figured out corridors, etc., etc." This was, sad to say, theoretically imaginable. That it is actually playing out is the thing that shocks us so much. That we never thought it would actually come to this, but it is consistent with rhetoric set in motion by the president and not manifestly rejected at the beginning by Republicans who were in the place to do so.
And John, who's still with us, the rhetoric of the president, too, in terms of inciting and keeping these embers of angst burning, has now erupted in the United States Capitol. What culpability do some of the lawmakers have who also objected to that? Real quick, Major has something. What are you going to say?
I'm going to read a tweet from the president 1 minute ago. Quote, "I am asking everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful, period. No violence, exclamation point. Remember, we, all in capitals, we are the party of law and order. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue. Thank you."
And now the president trying to reel back in a mob that has been unleashed.
Trying to do what he should have done moments ago, hours ago, perhaps weeks ago. When you said, Nora, about, I can't remember, an hour and a half ago, the president tweeted, "It's going to be a wild one." What do you think that means? How do you think that's interpreted by the people who are on the Capitol steps? A wild one. That's suggesting to them that wildness is encouraged by the most powerful person in America, the President of the United States.
And so, John, when you incite it by suggesting weeks ago that it's going to be a wild one, can you just tweet it away? Can you just put all this stuff back in a bottle and expect it to disappear?
You know, you can't do that any more than you could during the rallies in 2015 and 2016 when the president would encourage his supporters to take care of, by physical force, those who showed up at his rallies and protested. This isn't just happening today. This is a long history of consistent behavior by the president, and so this comes in as the last ugly sentence in a long series of chapters between the president and this kind of behavior. This is just the ugliest manifestation of it.
And how many of these supporters are looking at the president's Twitter feed and following it loyally, as if when he'd said, you know, end the protest, that all of a sudden they would remove themselves from inside the Capitol?
Well, I'll let John answer that first, and then I'll take a swing after he does.
Well, I would just say, and Major knows this in his bones because he spent so much time talking to them and has been with them. The people to whom this is the greatest offense are those people who feel alienated from their country and who might have voted for Donald Trump and who, wanted to see a different outcome in the election. And they are the ones who are being besmirched by this and by the incitement of it. And so that, I think, you all have been quite careful to point out that the ones who are breaking the glass and banging on the doors are a very small minority, and they are now defining a large number of people.
I'm getting this now from a high-ranking member of the Sergeant of Arms office who was outside, said he was tear-gassed, said he's never seen anything like this, and we are fully losing the battle. They breached the West Front, and they just took the East Front. We witnessed that, but I read it again out loud because there it is, the tear gas and the question about, which Chris first spotted. We thought that the police and authorities were using it against the protesters. It appears it might have been used against our law enforcement.
Chemical irritants used by some of the protesters to push back or to repel Capitol Police or those with the Sergeant of Arms office, which is part of the governing body of the House of Representatives itself. There's a separate governing body for the United States Senate. But to pick up on John's point, and to answer your question directly, Nora, there's a very, very tight feedback loop between the president's supporters and what the president says, tighter than any I've ever seen in American politics. They do vector off what he says closely and almost by the minute. And in this scenario, what the president just tweeted, I do believe will have a pacifying effect. I'm just telling you, and the nation, it's too late.
I just cannot underscore the tension that exists in many parts of the United States Capitol right now. You're likely feeling it at home by what you're seeing. And the deep concerns among those in positions of authority to make sure we get this right and that the situation does not escalate. I reported just a short time ago that based on a source and a defense official that there has been a request by the mayor of D.C. for 200 additional National Guardsmen, and it is currently under review. No decision has been made. The concern, of course, is about any future confrontation.
Right.
Can this just quickly de-escalate without an image of what appeared to be, while they're National Guard, what some people may look and think is active duty, that sort of image would then create not only domestically, but certainly by our foreign adversaries. And so the people in positions of great power that control the levers of national security are weighing this with the utmost seriousness. You now have Senator Ted Cruz, who helped unleash some of this and fuel some of this anger, now also tweeting out, "Calm down, time to end this," as has been pointed out. The question is whether these senators and others who hold the levers of power want to courageously step forward and move this towards an end. And I think the leadership, as you mentioned, the vacuum that exists, that Senator McConnell tried to exert earlier today, is one that people are watching.
Ted Cruz
who now steps into
and
this
Josh Hawley could say, this will end if you don't get out of the Capitol. We will stop this unless you get out of the Capitol. This is no way to conduct our business. They could do that. I wait to see what their actual response will be. But to your point, Nora, and it is so important, for all sorts of institutional reasons, for historic reasons, for image reasons, the Capitol Police would like to be in the position to take back this situation on its own and not ask for the National Guard to come onto the Capitol grounds and essentially repel these protesters who have breached the Capitol. No. The Capitol Police would like to be able to do that and exert its own authority, but they may be wholly outnumbered and incapable of doing that.
Just a quick update from the D.C. Fire Department. We're hearing that they have responded and transported at least 2 to 3 people with injuries, and that they are now looking into reports of shots fired at the Capitol now. Let's bring in Nancy Cordes, who is still on Capitol Hill. Nancy?
And Nora, the House Minority Leader, Republican Kevin McCarthy, confirmed just a few minutes ago that shots have been fired inside the Capitol building. He didn't say by whom. It's not clear whether he knows by whom, but multiple reporters have said that they've seen at least one person being carried out of the Capitol on a stretcher, covered in what appeared to be blood. So, you know, we don't know if that was a protester or a police officer. Obviously, this is a completely fluid event. And take a look at this. This is the crypt of the U.S. Capitol, and what you're looking at is essentially hand-to-hand combat between Capitol police officers and these protesters who appear to be trying to storm that area of the Capitol as police officers try to keep them back. That area is called the crypt because it was originally designed to be the final resting place for George Washington before he decided that actually he would rather be laid to rest at his beloved Mount Vernon. But it is an area on the first floor of the Capitol, and I'm just speculating here, but it's likely that police were trying to keep the protesters out of this area because there are spaces in the bowels of the Capitol where lawmakers can be taken to be kept safe. And police probably didn't want these protesters getting any closer to the basement of the Capitol than they already were.
Nancy, those were photos from inside the House chamber as you were speaking there, in case anyone's curious about where exactly that was taken. Those were, there you go.
This here, yeah, before it was the crypt.
That is in essence the front door of the House chamber itself. There are members, this was taken earlier. One of our colleagues reports from somebody that was in that chamber, and of course we talked to Zach Hudak earlier, that among other things, no protester got inside the House chamber during this dramatic altercation. But at one point, the House chaplain went to the podium and offered a prayer saying, "Pray for the safety of all, including the Capitol Police, and that all can work together for our country." Just a dramatic day inside the Capitol.
It's incredibly dramatic, and many people may recognize those doors from the State of the Union.
Exactly.
Right.
Those are the
Sergeant of Arms.
That's where they walk
in to announce the President of the United States, to announce the arrival of the Supreme Court, the Diplomatic Corps, all the pageantry, all the ways our institutions come together once a year for the State of the Union. They do so in the People's House, the House of Representatives. Nora, you know it. Ed, you know it. It's the most beautiful building in the Capitol. One of the great pleasures of walking around Capitol Hill is seeing people who have deep disagreements, geographic, philosophical, and otherwise, working together, working alongside one another, and trying to resolve differences in the true spirit of the American Republic. And all of that is being jeopardized here and now on this day by people who wear hats that say, "Make America Great Again." I ask them to answer the question, is this American greatness? It is not.
I think it's a moment now to be reflective, too, and talk about the historical significance of this. Let's bring in Jeff Rosen. And Jeff, as a constitutional law expert, what did the framers, what were they most concerned about?
The framers' central concern when they drafted the Constitution in 1787 was mob violence. Madison said in Federalist 55, "In all large assemblies, passion never fails to wrest the scepter from reason. Even if every Athenian had been Socrates, Athens would still have been a mob." The framers are concerned about farmers in western Massachusetts mobbing the courthouses because they don't want to pay their debts. And their central goal in drafting the Constitution and creating the Electoral College was to deny Congress any direct role in electing the president. That was why they created an Electoral College, because they were afraid that if Congress elected the president would be in the thrall of factions and of mobs. So the conduct of the president and the conduct of some Congress people in abrogating powers that the framers tried to deny them has resulted in the framers' greatest nightmare.
And the remedy, then, that the framers instituted to make sure, or at least to try and prevent such mob violence, was what, Jeff?
It was filters, cooling mechanisms, intermediate bodies to prevent populist passions from ruling. They wanted to slow down deliberation so that people couldn't demand that their factional or partisan interests are created. And that was the point of the Electoral College, a group of wise men, they were all men then, who were supposed to coolly deliberate and choose the best candidates without any attention to the views of the mob or the people. Even after the election of 1800 in the 12th Amendment, the Constitution made clear that it's the Electoral College that chooses the president, and Congress's role is purely ministerial. It's just supposed to count the votes. That's why Senator Toomey was correct before Congress was forced to disband today, when he said that the Constitution gives Congress no role in making substantive determination about who won the presidency when there's no genuine dispute about which ballots a state has submitted. We are reaping what we have sown. I cannot overestimate how dangerous it is to depart from the framers' intended system, but they were visionaries. Even though they didn't know about Twitter, they did know about mobs, and they knew about demagogues who would inflame the passions of the people and try to mobilize them to thwart the rule of law on which democracy depends, and they created the Constitution to avoid that. And that is why we must return to our constitutional procedures. Congress must reconvene and perform its purely ministerial and ceremonial role in certifying the result of an election which has already occurred, and the president-elect must be recognized as the next president of the United States.
And Jeff Rosen, you have put this so beautifully and so eloquently as president of the National Constitution Center and a scholar, of course, of the Constitution. And so I wonder, because this is exactly, well, you put it a lot better than Tom Cotton did in his op-ed, but I wonder then what risk those like Ted Cruz and others who supported this effort have done to, even though they are also, quote-unquote, constitutional experts, how damaging has their interpretation of what the process could be today done to our democracy?
The damage has been incalculable. The National Constitution Center is nonpartisan. It was created by Congress to increase awareness of the Constitution on a nonpartisan basis. I am only allowed to summarize the consensus of liberal and conservative scholars, ranging from Judge Michael Ludig, who Vice President Pence quoted today, to progressive scholars, that Congress is not supposed to play a substantive role in second-guessing the valid decisions of the Electoral College. Senator Cruz, Senator Hawley, former Supreme Court clerks were playing with fire when pandering to populist passions and the desire to court partisan favor. They departed from the system that the Constitution set out, and they will have to be accountable to their consciences and to the Constitution of the United States.
Jeff Rosen, stay with us. Want to bring in Grace Seegers, who has been there witnessing this on Capitol Hill. Will not say to protect her own safety, but Grace, tell us what you've been witnessing.
Hi, Nora. Yes. So it's been pretty chaotic. We are now in a safe location along with all of the senators, but things have been really scary. I will say it was pretty terrifying when the Senate suddenly went into recess and all of the doors in the chamber were locked down. The reporters were locked down in the chamber with the senators, and we really didn't know what was going on. After about half an hour of that, we were escorted from the chamber and evacuated to a safe location, and now we're kind of in a holding pattern, but I've never seen anything like this.
And Grace, talk about any violence that you saw.
So I didn't see any violence, but I heard protesters when we were evacuating. We were also told not to take the stairs because there were demonstrators on the stairs, so we took elevators, which normally would not happen in a crisis. And we are hearing from the police officers and seeing from the police officers that there still is a lot of violence. I've seen police officers walk by with riot gear. It's just unclear what the situation is right now.
Okay, want to bring in, thank you so much, Grace. Stay safe. I want to quickly bring in Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader. Leader McCarthy, do you condemn this violence?
I completely condemn the violence in the Capitol. What we're currently watching unfold is un-American. I am disappointed. I'm sad. This is not what our country should look like. This is not who we are. This is not the First Amendment. This has to stop, and this has to stop now.
Have you spoken with the president and asked him to perhaps come to the Capitol and tell the supporters it's time to leave?
I've spoken to the president. I asked him to talk to the nation to tell him to stop this. This is not who we are. We are the beacon of freedom. We show democracy how we should act. We show the rest of the world, and this is not it. I don't know who in the crowd is doing this. I know there's good and bad. This has got to stop. This is unacceptable. What the Capitol Police have had to do, what the danger that it's put other people in, the people are being hurt.
I can't believe, and I'm so glad you brought, our Capitol Police should not have to deal with this, and I know you care about them deeply. You said you spoke with the president. What did the president say he would do?
I know he had put a tweet out there. I told him he needs to talk to the nation. I told him what was happening right then. I mean, from what I watched in the Capitol, from the way you had to move within the Capitol, the rush that had to come in, the windows that were being broken. Listen, as a nation, everybody in this nation has got to take a deep breath and understand we're all Americans. We can disagree, but we do not do this. This is not who we are. This is
who do you think bears responsibility? I hate to ask you this, but who do you think bears responsibility for this, for inciting this mob?
You know what? I think there's a combination. Anyone who's ever incited, anyone who's encouraged this. We can encourage to disagree. We can be passionate about our beliefs, but this is not where we go. This is not the best. This is not the best of who we are. I'm appalled by what I'm seeing happen right now.
And you think that it was just organic, that this protest just happened on its own?
No. If you watch some of the people, if you watch some of the things I watched in this Capitol, there are people inside here that have planned. There are people taking advantage. There are people that get over emotional. There are people that want to make America look like this. All I know is the Capitol Police should not have to be doing. the number of Capitol Police we have, I can't thank them enough for protecting the number of members, the number of staffers. You know, in that building, there's a lot of young people. That is the people's house. What should have happened was the American public should be able to watch the debate, an honest, open debate, not what's going on right now.
The president invited tens of thousands of people to quote-unquote stop the steal. I don't know if you heard his more than hour-long remarks or the remarks of his son, who was the wind-up. It was some heated stuff, Leader McCarthy. I just wonder whether someone is going to accurately call a spade. And I'm giving you the opportunity right now that your precious and beloved United States Capitol and our democracy is witnessing this. Call a spade a spade.
I was very clear with the president when I called him. This has to stop, and he's got to go to the American public and tell them to stop this. This is not who we are. This is not who his supporters are. This is more than politics. This is the foundation of this nation. This is the democracy that we are supposed to be the torch for the rest of the world. This is not the view we should see, and nobody should encourage it, and nobody should be a part of it.
And so to the leaders who believe that this election was stolen and that oppose the count of the Electoral College, including yourself, why have you all run from the Capitol? Why not stay there and meet these people who believe the same way that you do? Why not meet them with courage?
I can't tell you where we are out of safety for everybody else. But the one thing I will tell you is people can have a disagreement. We disagree every day when it comes to politics. People can have that, not this. Nobody supports this. Nobody encourages this. Nobody wants this. I want to be very clear. I condemn any of this activity. This is not anything I support. This is not anything that I would be a part of, and this has got to stop.
Why, I just wonder, are there members of the leadership headed to the White House to try and move this process forward? We're at that point. As you know, Leader McCarthy, we're at that point where this is not only something that tears down at the fabric of our democracy, but will be used by our foreign adversaries. You say you want it to stop. What are you going to do now to make it stop?
I'm meeting with the other leaders. I'm talking to the president. I want to first and foremost make sure the security of our Capitol Police and the people who are in the Capitol. Let's get this out of control. Let's get them out of the Capitol, out of the chambers. Let's make sure people are safe, and this can never happen again.
Leader McCarthy, the President of the United States has a briefing room steps from the Oval Office. The cameras are hot 24/7, as you know. Why hasn't he walked down and said that now?
I conveyed to the president what I think is best to do, and I'm hopeful the president will do it.
And have you spoken with his chief of staff?
I've spoken to the president. I've spoken to other people in there and to the White House as well.
You don't think he's sitting and maybe taking some delight watching this?
I don't know of any American that takes delight in this. I wouldn't assume that about anybody. I can't believe someone would take delight in this. This is appalling.
It appears an all-hands-on-deck situation. It is an all-hands-on-deck. This is the moment that requires leadership. And if it's not presidential leadership, it's congressional leadership. And I think that the American public will hold people accountable for it. And I just am waiting to find out what that is. Where is that leadership?
Well, one thing I will tell you right now, we're sitting in the midst of this to get this under control. I will tell you first and foremost, for anything that's happening, this has got to stop, and I'm doing everything in my power to make sure it does. This will never happen again. Well, whoever created this has got to be held accountable for it. So the one thing I will tell you from the highest of offices, I went directly to make that action take place. And I will continue to make that action to take place.
Leader McCarthy, Major Garrett,
yes,
any misgivings about the objections raised and what was set in motion on the floor today that created this environment, that created the storming of the Capitol, or at least, if not created an atmosphere in which they thought it was permissible?
Well, no one should ever think this is permissible, and I don't think today started it. But when I've watched this entire nation, how we've gone time and again. I mean, I could go back a number of times, but never to this point. So who's ever been involved in that? A pox on all houses, who ever participated in any of this. This should be a moment that brings us together, that not divides us. This should be a moment where our fiber of democracy gets stronger because we're being challenged at this moment. This is where Republicans and Democrats and independents should stand together against this and never allow this to happen again.
Leader McCarthy, does the Capitol Police need to have reinforcements from the National Guard to create a stability situation to get the Capitol back under control?
From what I'm seeing right here, I am not a police officer, but I think they're doing an amazing job with the size of this crowd. And there were barriers around. They have broken through a number of barriers, but I think for the security of others, I think help is needed.
From the National Guard?
Yes.
And what is the plan to bring Congress back into session? Do you have intentions of doing that tonight, getting back to work, or are you going to take a powder for the rest of the day?
I think first and foremost, let's get this under control. Let's take a deep breath right now. Let's solve this. And let's take this moment for everyone who is listening, for anyone who's watching. We all have a responsibility here. Let's not blame everybody else. Let's take a responsibility as ourselves. Did we ever do something on social media? Did we ever yell at somebody on a political belief? And let's stop that. Let's stop and respect one another and never take it to this level ever again.
Leader McCarthy, this is Ed O'Keefe, along with Nora and Major. A few questions on what transpired this afternoon. What is your understanding about injuries inside the Capitol? Was anyone shot? Was anyone else hurt? We've heard conflicting reports, and I know you've been a confirming source on some of this elsewhere.
Look, because of my locality of where my office was, right by the Capitol, because of the Capitol Police and where they had to close everything down, I could hear on radio different things that are being reported. I will wait to see what they are able to report. I don't want to give any misinformation out there, but from what I heard and what I was able to view, I know people are being hurt.
Okay. And what was your understanding of the Capitol Police's preparations for today? Did they give you a sense in advance that they were planning more or a more robust presence ahead of today's events?
Yes, they had more robust. They had barriers further away from the Capitol. They had barriers on the backside. Those were broken through. I could see from my office people coming in. I saw more reinforcements coming in. I've seen them overtake them just by the size going through windows. I've never seen anything like this.
And as far as you know, all of your colleagues are safe and not injured? All your House lawmaker colleagues?
I'm getting reports now from staff and from others. From right now, people are safe, but...
Leader McCarthy, Rudy Giuliani said this morning before the crowd of tens of thousands, let's have trial by combat. Will you denounce those comments?
I totally denounce. I denounce anyone that thinks that is what we do in America. That is not what we do in America. That is not who we are.
I just am at odds with how political leaders can believe that words and rhetoric don't matter. History teaches that.
They do matter. I've watched it on both sides of the aisle. I've watched it go. I've had a colleague shot. I've watched members say to go after other members. This has got to stop. And you know what? It has to not just stop with our leaders. It's got to stop with everybody in America themselves. That they think if they say something on social media, they're just saying it. The threats that go. I've watched different houses come after them. All of that has got to stop, and we've got to respect one another and respect the difference of opinion. This is not what we do when we disagree.
The highest-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, we thank you for your time condemning the violence and telling us that you have called the president and urged him to address the nation to end this now. We wish you success in your urging of the president to do that. Thank you. I'm actually kind of emotionally moved by his comments because it's like it's all come to this, you know. It's
and you can
hear
understand
who has been a stalwart supporter of the president. Thank you. And
but you know,
he doesn't want to admit what is obviously true. What is obviously true is this did not happen just because.
Organically, as I said, it just...
Oh, it's January 6, 2021. Let's storm the Capitol.
No one has ever cared about this date before, except in the 1800s and
it has been.
Similar
We have been
process.
brought to this shabby moment of violence by some, storming the Capitol, taking its siege, trying to occupy it for a specific reason and in pursuit of a specific outcome, an outcome that would violate the Constitution and governing federal law. That is where we are. And I understand the political reluctance of Leader McCarthy to say that is what happened. But Rudy Giuliani speaks for the president. The president complimented Rudy Giuliani for his very rhetoric that Leader McCarthy condemned this morning. They are not separable. They are inseparable. They are lockstep. And that is what has created this atmosphere. Again, we delineate. There are peaceful protesters there, and there are those who have stormed the United States Capitol. Those who have stormed and have taken this to a violent end must be dealt with. And as Leader McCarthy made clear, they are violating the law and must be prosecuted.
We sit here just before 4 o'clock on the East Coast, and it appears all the violence is over. It appears most, if not all, lawmakers are in and around the Capitol campus, whether it's in the Capitol building itself or the House and Senate office buildings or the Visitor Center, which is actually there just below where most of these protesters are. There are secure facilities down there for classified briefings and, frankly, shelters designed for security incidents like this. So it very well could be, we don't know, but we know that there are facilities in and around the complex here where members, especially of the line of succession, could be brought and kept. We also know, we're going to hear in a little bit from the president-elect, Joe Biden, who was already scheduled to speak this afternoon from Wilmington, Delaware, and is expected to speak just briefly on what has transpired today here in Washington.
And where's the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, who's also tweeting out for it to end? I mean, he has more security than anybody. Why isn't he in the White House in the Oval Office with the President of the United States? Why isn't he in the briefing room? And again, this is leadership by tweet.
Right.
Where is the address to the nation? It's
I don't see anyone outside looking at their phones while they're sitting here on the steps of the Capitol. Somebody else has got to get to them and tell them to leave. And that's the other thing. You know, if we're at a standstill right now, where nobody's breaking in, but they're still lingering, at what point does somebody have to step in and tell these people back off so that we can hold these two proceedings?
Right.
And will they do that before the sunset? And will they do that before the sun sets tonight? Because if not, it could get quite interesting.
Let me bring in Nancy Cordes, who remains on Capitol Hill. Nancy.
You know, Nora, I was listening to your amazing interview with Leader McCarthy and appreciated the fact that he said that he's now urging the president to use better rhetoric. But I have to tell you that over the past 4 years, on a near weekly basis, when I have asked Leader McCarthy or Leader McConnell or many other Republicans about the president's rhetoric, about clear lies, about threats that he has made, about insults that he has made to Republicans and Democrats alike, about inappropriate things that he has done, they have almost always looked the other way, excused it, pretended not to know what we were talking about. At every turn, when they've had an opportunity to stand up and say this is not acceptable, they have chosen not to do so. And so it's no surprise if you don't call him out that after 4 years, his supporters, who are also your supporters if you're a Republican, believe the things that he is saying, because other people who they respect, Republican leaders at the Capitol, have not stood up to him. Even as recently as the last couple of months, Nora, when the president started to say that this election was stolen from him and making these wild claims of fraud and irregularities, Republicans would tell me privately, well, we just have to let him do it. We have to humor him. We have to stand by him, because if we don't, it'll only be worse. We got to let him get it out of his system. But of course, at the end of the day, he'll never really try to hold on to power. Well, what happened today? He's urging his own vice president to overturn the results of the election. If that isn't an attempt at a coup, I don't know what is. And so, you know, Republican leaders, I think, do bear some responsibility here, because while their aides have at times even described the president as a madman, I'm not making that up, Nora. They have used that term, a madman. They are saying that privately, but in public, their bosses are saying either nothing or exactly the opposite.
And it's an interesting point that you raise, Nancy, because I got the sense today, and it started with Mitch McConnell, who we all praised as making a historic and remarkable speech. He essentially tried to put the genie back in the bottle. That we can't continue with this. It'll lead us into a death spiral.
Right. Retract the zone of permission that he and other Republicans have given President Trump for 4 years, as Nancy has so laudably articulated. That zone of permission has been wide and expansive, and in some cases, almost elastic. It can never be stretched to its ultimate limits, maybe until just now. And this is what happens when a zone of permission becomes so permissible, and you inspire people to think of themselves as insurrectionists, as those who have to storm the Capitol to preserve their idea of what America is. When you lose the idea of what America is through violence, you've given up. You've given up.
It's like lighting a match to put a house on fire and then yelling at the fire, stop burning, stop burning. But you can't yell at a fire to stop it from burning. You have to hose it down. I'm being told that we have, because we've reached the point, and Leader McCarthy has confirmed it, and I think why he's speaking out is that the situation has turned violent on Capitol Hill. It has led to some serious injuries as well as gunshots being fired, and I think that's why so many who love this Capitol so... This is the person who was apparently wounded by gunshot. We want to warn you that there is blood.
But this was inside the United States Capitol this afternoon in the wake of this violence and unrest.
I'm going to stay safe inside, but I'll call you back.
And as we watch this, we know now that the governor of Virginia is sending some of his National Guard, and Maryland Governor Larry Hogan has tweeted that at his direction, the D.C. Police and U.S. Capitol Police will be backed up by members of the Maryland State Police, saying all Americans should be outraged by this attack. The Attorney General of the District of Columbia reiterating to district residents, quote, all district residents must remain at home. Under no circumstances should anyone travel downtown nor be in the vicinity of federal buildings, calling on the president to order his supporters to leave the District of Columbia and embrace the peaceful transition to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris later this month. But pretty telling that the district had to go to its neighbors and not the military to get assistance faster when they're clearly in need of assistance there at the Capitol to keep this orderly, especially, again, as the sun begins to set over the Capitol.
There are a lot of angry people today who have felt someone stoke the feelings that they have and have come now to the Capitol in a...
We now have a joint statement from Leader Schumer and Speaker Pelosi.
Okay.
One sentence. We are calling on President Trump to demand that all protesters leave the U.S. Capitol and Capitol grounds immediately.
Okay. I'm now just hearing and getting from the Chief Pentagon spokesman that the D.C. Guard has been mobilized to provide support to federal law enforcement in the district. Acting Secretary Miller has been in contact with congressional leadership, and Secretary McCarthy has been working with the D.C. government. The law enforcement response will be led by the Department of Justice. Led by the Department of Justice. Again, this fine line that we talked about earlier, as the Pentagon and military expressed by the former 10 secretaries of defense do not want this to be a military act, that this is a law enforcement act, and that's why the Justice Department is taking the lead, but to making sure that this mob violence is quelled quickly and
under an acting Attorney General with an uncertain leadership.
And an acting Defense Secretary.
Yes, ring of leaders in both institutions. But to your earlier point, Nora, about that op-ed signed by those 10 secretaries of state who worked for Democrats and Republicans, we all sitting at this table know that that op-ed was written because people had concerns that were more than theoretical. Right. That they had heard things, that there were discussions, that there were theories or things being bounced around in their particular areas of expertise and awareness. And if you're a former defense secretary, I think you know what I'm talking about. You talk to lots of people who are at the cusp and the very front lines of all of these things in the national security apparatus that never would have been penned had people not legitimate concerns about what might transpire.
This is video from inside the House chamber earlier. So where this is being shot from is actually the side of the House chamber where the First Lady normally sits.
Yes, correct.
During a State of the Union. There you can see members of Congress. That's Pramila Jayapal.
Pramila Jayapal from Washington, correct.
Remember, there you go. And you can,
There's the gunshot.
Let's listen. That's a police officer there, obviously.
Capitol Police officer, yep.
And that woman there is a member of Congress. I couldn't make out who exactly.
She appears to be making a video or a statement because she's giving somewhat of a speech.
She's praying. She is praying.
And there were a lot of prayers said today, not only on Capitol Hill, but across America for the state of our...
Everybody stay down! Sit down!
And that...
Everybody stay down, shouts a member of Congress inside the hallowed halls of our United States Congress.
And that's not a shower cap. That's the kind of mask that are under the seats.
Protective, yes.
In the event of some kind of chemical agent being released in the chamber. So remember, we reported earlier that members had been instructed to use the gas masks under their seats and have them ready, or to shelter under their chairs. And this is the video showing that, in fact, many did do that.
I'm good. Are you okay? I'm good.
We know the House chamber wasn't breached by protesters, but the Senate chamber was. Because, remember, they had cleared the Senate out faster. And apparently some of the protesters were able to make it onto the Senate floor. And...
Right. And just to remind people, if you haven't visited the Capitol before, you have the dome in the middle, you have the House chamber on one side, the Senate chamber on the other. And there you have the images of tear gas. That's the United States Capitol. And so there's the east front, right, or the steps on the bottom of the screen, and the west front where the inaugural will take place at the top of the screen. And you saw much of the breach, we believe, might have come from both places. As people went through not only Statuary Hall, but also what's right below Statuary Hall, which is
the crypt, which is the basement area under the rotunda. So they were
under the rotunda,
which has access out to the street. So it would have been an easier way to get into the building for some.
Going back to what the Senate Majority Leader said on the floor, back when this day did not have the odor and the repellent imagery of insurrection, he said the president had embraced sweeping conspiracy theories. So let's just walk through this very carefully. It has been suggested the president and his campaign and those allied with it have not had their day in court. That's correct in a certain sense of way. They've had about 60, maybe 70 days in court in lots of different venues, bringing lots of different lawsuits. And all but one have been nullified for lack of point of law and lack of evidence or lack of standing. And in 3 cases, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, federal courts invited the Trump campaign to bring specific evidence of grievances about the conduct of elections in those 3 states to prove the allegations of fraud. And in all 3 instances, before federal courts, the Trump campaign withdrew, did not provide any evidence. So these conspiracy theories have now quite clearly run amok, and they have brought us to this sad and deeply regrettable moment we are seeing playing out on live television.
We've just learned that the FBI has been deployed to assist U.S. Capitol Police. There are now concerns about those who are will be held responsible in a criminal way. I also want to bring back in Jeffrey Rosen, who's president of the National Constitution Center. And Jeff, one of the ideas that people have discussed in watching this is part of the U.S. Code about seditious conspiracy and about what has led us to this moment. Can you walk us through what is at the heart of seditious conspiracy?
Seditious conspiracy occurs when two or more people conspire to overthrow or put down by force the government of the United States in any state or any part of the United States subject to its jurisdiction. So this law has been used to prosecute Puerto Rican nationalists, white supremacists, Islamic terrorists in the 1990s. Those have been the most recent uses of that law. I've just reread the text. The conspiracy doesn't even have to succeed. Even if it's attempted, it can be charged. And I have not researched this or read the case law, so this isn't a carefully considered opinion. But the text of the law, which forbids two or more people conspiring to overthrow by force the government of the United States, arguably applies to this case.
Jeffrey Rosen, thank you as always for your brilliance and for standing with us. And just one more point on that, on the idea of seditious conspiracy and what you just laid out. Do you imagine that's something that someone could be charged with?
Well, it could indeed. That would be a federal decision. It would be under the Department of Justice. The new department, led by Merrick Garland, who's just been nominated today, could bring those charges. They would have to decide which members of the mob to charge and how they conspired together. But it would be a federal charge, and it could indeed be brought by the U.S. government.
And then, Jeff, as you watch all this, your thoughts?
Your passion and the gravity of your reaction as you watch them are those that I share and all citizens share. This is not America, and we must cleave to the Constitution and the rule of law as a shining light. Abraham Lincoln gave the most moving speech to the Springfield Lyceum, where he said that when we allow passion to get the better of reason, then we run the risk of succumbing to mob rule and abandoning the rule of law. Let's reread Lincoln's speech to those people in Springfield, set aside our partisan differences, and realize that without the Constitution and the rule of law as our lodestar, everything that makes America a beacon of light and liberty will be imperiled.
Well said, and hopefully those words will be incorporated by some of our leaders as they address this moment. I should let people know that we are expecting to hear from the President-elect Joe Biden at this moment. We have heard from the leading Republican in the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, who condemned the violence and said he had spoken with the President of the United States, President Trump, and asked him to condemn the violence. But we've not heard President Trump come before the American people on camera. We've not heard from the Vice President on camera. They have sent some comments via tweet. But after earlier addressing this crowd of tens of thousands, they have not yet come forward to address them again and ask them to stop the violence against our United States Capitol. The D.C. Fire Department says 5+ people have been transported to the hospital. The woman who we showed you earlier who was shot, she is in critical condition and is at a nearby hospital. We've shown you the pictures of people crawling up the sides of the U.S. Capitol. Someone has fallen off and is suffering from abrasions and fractures. We're also told of someone suffering from cardiac arrest at the U.S. Capitol. No further details from that.